November 20th meeting of the Lincoln City Planning Commission is now in session. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Kate, may we have a roll call, please?
Sure. Gary Cunningham.
Here.
Patty Crowan.
Here.
Marie McFarland.
Here.
Sean Keir.
Here.
Miles Schlesinger.
Here.
Doug Bryson is absent. And Steve Griffiths.
Here. Are there any agenda changes or revisions?
No, there aren't.
All right. May we have a motion to approve the minutes of our regular meeting on November 6th?
I motion that we approve the minutes from our meeting on November 6th.
Is there a second? Is there a second?
I second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
The minutes have been approved. There are no final orders, resolutions, and written communications. We do have 3 public hearings tonight, and we'll start with the first. It is now 6:02 p.m. The public hearing for file Z0A 2018-02 was opened on November 6th and remains open. This public hearing concerns a city-initiated proposal to amend Chapter 17.72 of the zoning ordinance. The amendments concern a number of changes to the city's sign code. The amendments will remove most content-based distinctions. Amendments add, revise, and delete a number of definitions. The draft ordinance defines flags and limits the allowed number of flags. It defines inflatable signs, pennants, and streamers, and prohibits those signs. The draft provides 2 options for provisions concerning non-conforming signs. The draft ordinance also includes numerous clarifications and grammatical changes. The Planning Commission's role tonight is to complete the public hearing, deliberate, and make a recommendation to City Council. The City Council may adopt the Planning Commission recommendation or may take other action. Before taking additional public testimony, the staff will present any updated information and respond to Commission questions. After that, any person may speak for up to 3 minutes. If your testimony includes questions, please direct them to me as the chair. We won't interrupt your testimony to answer questions. We may direct your questions to staff following your testimony. If the Planning Commission has questions, your time responding to any questions will not be counted in your time limit. If you wish to speak, please write your name and mailing address clearly on the sign-up list at the entrance. Please speak directly into the microphone and begin by stating your name only. Do not state your address. If you also have written testimony to submit into the record, please provide a copy to our recorder, Kate Daschle. Does the staff have additional information to present?
Just briefly reiterate that you had an earlier staff report with numerous changes explained. In the staff report for tonight's meeting, I just list the additional changes that I made. Most of them were in response to comments and concerns that the Commission had or the City Attorney. And so I just briefly go through them. In the definition of the balloon sign, I took out the word advertisement, so it doesn't limit the kind of message that balloon signs might carry. I added a provision saying banners are permitted only as a temporary sign. Added a definition of feather banner just to make more clear exactly what we were talking about on that. In the definition of flashing sign, I took out the allowance for change of display by dissolve or fade, and that was at the recommendation of the Oregon Department of Transportation, who doesn't allow that kind of change on those signs. Took out the word temporary from the definition of real estate sign. Took out the 4-inch border on the measurement of signs. You recall that the way the ordinance is currently written is if you want to measure the area of a sign of indefinite shape, you do a rectangle around it 4 inches away from any part of the copy. This would just take that 4 inches away so that the actual copy area then would be allowed to be bigger. Added language saying that flags must not project into a public right-of-way or onto abutting property. Rewrote the temporary sign provisions to try to make it a little bit clearer, although it may not be clear enough, and suggest you might want to take a look at that. Added projected signs to the list of prohibited signs, and I think we may want to actually change that term to projected image signs. So to distinguish, make it clear it's something different from projecting signs, which is something that sticks out from the wall. And then we probably should add a definition for projected image signs as well. Then added lights to the items that may not be attached to portable signs. It says balloons, streamers, and such could not be added. And I recommend we also say that they can't be illuminated.
Thank you. Does the commission have any questions for staff?
I do.
Patty?
Does temporary, I don't see temporary defined in the terms, although I see temporary sign defined. Is that a 60-day maximum?
Actually,
is that what defines temporary?
It's 60 days, but it's 60 days twice a year is what it sets out.
Okay, thank you.
And a license is required for one of those temporary
Permit,
signs?
yes.
Is
And no
there a
fees-
charge for the
no
license?
fee for that.
There's no fee for it.
But there's a permit.
Permits required, yes.
Any further questions for staff? So such things as, what do you call them? Windsocks are not covered by this ordinance.
Windsocks are not covered, neither are kites.
Neither are kites. Okay, thank you. All right.
How about kites?
By saying they're not covered, it means we don't consider them signs, so they're exempt.
And
Miles?
that would be kites with a message on them for advertising either a business or an event?
We exempt kites.
Okay. As we go forward tonight, Commissioners, when we're talking about this ordinance, I would really request that we refrain from referring to specific properties or businesses. So please keep your questions general in nature. So now is the time for public comment and testimony. And again, please state your name only. And the first name on the list is Lori R.C. Torres.
Good evening. Hi, I'm Lori Arcetoris, Executive Director of the Lincoln City Chamber of Commerce, and I'm speaking tonight regarding the proposed changes to the sign code ordinance. Lincoln City has many small shops that depend heavily on having the ability to draw attention to their businesses, particularly in the winter months. I've spoken with many of those businesses, and they are very concerned about some of the proposed changes that will not only limit their ability to use the various ways of attracting customers, but it will also hit their bottom line with additional sign permit charges.
Excuse me, you can. All right, so just a
Okay.
reminder, turn off your cell phones, please. Lori, please continue.
All right.
Time was not counted against you.
Okay. Thank you. I agree that the current sign ordinance is in desperate need of updating, but from the start, it has been very cumbersome and a confusing process. It wasn't immediately evident how the changes would affect the individual businesses, and after hearing the proposals and asking additional questions, it has shed some light on just how the changes would take effect to the specific businesses. Now that we have this specific information, I believe it will take a discussion between the planning department and the business owners involved to come up with a compromise that will benefit all concerned. The Chamber would be happy to organize a committee that can analyze the proposals and review the additional recent changes that we've just heard and make recommendations if necessary. I understand the desire to finish the project. However, the changes will remain in effect a very long time, as these ordinances have been in effect a very long time, and we need to make sure that the sign code is clear, concise, and easy to understand before it is adopted. Thank you.
Do the commissioners have any questions of Lori? Gary?
Do you have more specific things that, or you're just saying that you feel at this point in time that the ordinance as it is adjusted needs a total re-look at it?
Well, just a few specifics to make sure that the business owners understand exactly what the changes will be and how it will affect them. The one that seems to be kind of the most concerning are the feather banners or the flags that a lot of businesses use. So I would like to really analyze what the changes are and how that would affect them.
Thank you.
Miles?
Lori, do you see any need for taking the 6 centers, Ocean Lake, Wacoma, and such, and making special provisions for those signs? Because there are different types of neighborhoods, and those divisions are pretty evident as you drive down the coast from Taft to Wacoma.
Right, and there again, you know, I think it just kind of adds to the confusion why one store can do it and another can't, but that is something that can be looked at.
Any more questions? Patty? Yeah.
Lori, just for my own edification, what percentage of the businesses in town do you represent?
Percentage of the businesses? That's a good question. I don't know, probably half,
Okay.
I
and a
have
lot of the small businesses.
I have a couple of questions for you. Is there any evidence that feather banners are an effective advertising tool?
Well, they may not be advertising, but it draws attention to your business.
Have you gotten complaints from other chamber members about feather banners blocking view, a pedestrian or motorist view of their own stores?
No.
Thank you. Any further questions? Thank you, Laura.
All right, thank you.
Next, I have Michael Oswald.
Good evening. My name is Michael Oswald, and I wanted to discuss a little bit. During your last meeting, you had raised questions about what was truly a sign and what was truly a flag. I'd like you to take a look at the definition of a flag again. If you were to look in most dictionaries, the definition of a flag states a piece of cloth or similar material, usually rectangular, attachable by one edge to a pole or a rope, and used as a symbol or an emblem of a country or an institution, or as a decoration. Feather flags or banners certainly fall under this definition. Presidential Executive Order 10798, all the way back January 3rd, 1959, President Eisenhower at that time continued to define what an American flag was, and that is with the hoist as being 1 and the fly being 1.9, so those are the measurements. So when that rule came into effect, he was strictly defining what the size of the American flag was supposed to be. There are clearly other types of flags that fall under the dictionary's definition, like multicolored flags, stars and stripes that even look like the American flags, and solid colored flags. A solid colored flag, it does not even fulfill the proposed definition of a sign as written in your own, the proposed statement of purpose in section 3, 17.72.010. And in the one portion of that, it states that a sign so that permitted signs provide adequate identification and direction. Solid colored fabric feather banners do not provide either one of those. They're just an expression of a color out there. So banners that do not include any writing or pictures on the fabric material clearly are not signs. They're a freedom of expression and they don't meet the definitions of a sign. So I'm asking you to please consider redefining some feather banners as being flags. Thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Bob Thomas? Bob Thomas? He's not present. All right. Is there any person in the audience who didn't sign up but wishes to speak? Seeing none. Are there any comments from representatives of public agencies? If there is no further comment, is there a motion to close the public hearing on the record, or do we want to discuss a little bit before we do that?
I'd like
Yes,
to
Richard.
discuss a little bit.
I just wanted to point out that there will be some further cooperation between the planning department and the city attorney's office in bringing the two ordinances together for consistency. So you did get a copy of the ordinance that the council already adopted regarding temporary signs. So there's obviously some issues where they need to be folded together a little bit better. So there will be some tweaks to the ordinances going forward.
Would it hinder the time flow that you have on adopting a 60-day period, or maybe a little longer, for Lori's Chamber of Commerce to meet with you so that she could iron out what bothers her and you could still get it done in 90 days and his part of it could be molded, fashioned together so that we can send to the city council a clean slate that we recommend?
We can follow any timetable you want.
Thank you.
Patty, do you have a comment?
I do, of course.
If I can just add one more thing, I'd really like to get it done before March 8th. So.
Okay. Thanks for that segue, because it appears to me that there are three things that are driving this proposal. One is the need to address content-based signs in order to protect the city from potential litigation.
And that's true, but we have addressed that to some extent because the first ordinance that was passed controls over this ordinance.
Okay, so that's, we can consider that covered?
To a large extent, it's
Okay.
been addressed. There are still content-based things in here that need to be fixed, but to a large extent, the immediate issue, or at least part of that issue, is gone.
Okay, excellent. The second thing that I think is driving this is something that seems to happen in this city a lot, and that happens to be a complaint-based response. That there have been some concerns voiced about particularly banners, and this is then a response to that. I'm not making a judgment on whether that's an appropriate thing to do or not. And the third is, Richard, you want to get this done before you retire. Here's my issue. This city is spending a lot of money right now on a design standard review for commercial buildings. And it seems to me that when you think about what you want the city to look like, which is what the design standards are all about, signs play an integral part in that. And so it seems that that should be nested into that process, looking at what signs fit with whatever design standards are ultimately approved in the city, what signs are inappropriate and maybe need to be done away with. So I'm not ready to sign off on any of these changes other than those that protect the city from litigation. I think we do need to initiate discussions nested within that design review process of the businesses in town and the residents in town, who also should have a say in what their city looks like. The banners are increasing in number. I think to a certain extent they're distracting. They do, in some instances, encroach on the public right-of-way. I think those are all things that need to be addressed. Some of them are torn, faded, in need of replacement. And we might be able to do better in terms of letting visitors and residents know what businesses are open and when they're open, with something that maybe is a little more consistent and frankly that looks a little nicer than sort of the hodgepodge that we have at this time. So and the only other thing I would say is, you know, we have I believe an enforcement issue in this town. We have lots and lots of laws on the books, and we have some spotty enforcement. For example, at our last meeting, it was brought up that it's really not legal to display merchandise outside of your business. And yet we know that that happens, and not just in businesses on 101, but grocery stores that put pumpkins out and vegetable bins and everything else out.
Car
in front of
dealerships?
Pardon me?
Car dealerships.
Car dealership, yeah. Well, that's another issue. But, you know, I would, so that's a sidelight. I'd sort of like to see the enforcement officer present an update to City Council so that we can meld these things together. But for the issue at hand, I would like to see the sign ordinance adjustments nested into the design standards review process. That's my statement.
I have a couple of comments on that to make. My one question would be to the city attorney: if we were to take that direction, would that hold up any work on the content-based initiative?
Well, first of all, there is a rule that says that you have to pass along your recommendation to the city council within 60 days, or it goes without your recommendation. So you don't have the unlimited ability to delay it.
So we could make a recommendation.
You could
to
make a
city
recommendation to
that
council
they include,
they fold it in.
they fold it into the design
And
standard.
it may be, and I realize that, again, we've addressed some of these content-based issues in an ordinance that we passed a month or so ago. But obviously, Richard feels that there are things in here that need to go. So it might be possible for us to go forward and delete from this code the temporary sign provisions that were causing problems, so we have clarity. We only have one set of temporary sign regulations, and take the other part and forward it on to the, you know, to fold into the design committee idea. So that's just an idea. What I'm saying is you do have to make a recommendation to council within 60 days. You've only had it for 2 weeks now, so you have a little time under your own rules. But yeah, we want to protect the city from any litigation. We've taken a large step toward doing that, but yeah, there's still things to do.
Okay, thank you. And the other point I wanted to make is I really like your pointing out the enforcement issue. There are numerous feather banners that are in the public right-of-way, and I think they create a hazard both for pedestrians and motorists. And our ordinances need to be enforced. They need to be removed. But any other comments? Yes.
I like what Lori had to say when she was up here as far as getting some of the businesses involved. And I think with our recommendation, if we make a recommendation to the city council, I'd like to include something about getting more of the businesses involved in some of this, because from my short time of seeing things, it seems like we go from one extreme to the other, and that there's some middle ground that could happen here, especially with some of the banners and the flags that businesses find most appropriate for their type of business. That doesn't happen, that may not be in here, and some of those ideas could come forth that may address some of these issues that would be more appealing to the businesses as well as meet the concerns and the needs in the city.
So that could be a recommendation to the city
Yes.
council, that they
I-
include
right,
the
that they
design
include
standard
this.
issue as well as a Chamber of Commerce input.
Correct.
Patty?
I just wanted to ask Lori, is the chamber actively involved in the design standard review process?
If you need to come up and talk into the microphone, Lori, thank you.
Yes, I do sit on that committee and have been to those meetings.
So it would be possible to put together a subcommittee on signs that is part of the design review that would include business owners and members of the public.
And in fact, I organized a public policy committee, and we met with Richard at one point to discuss the signs, and we had a lot of discussion, and that was kind of my point, that instead of reading through the clean copy, the red line copy, which is very confusing and hard to understand, let's just sit around and have a conversation. So that was how we proceeded at that point.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question of Richard. Is there a timeline with the design committee?
There is a schedule. We have a consultant that we're working with on this, and he has a statement of work as part of his contract. Signs are specifically excluded from that. That doesn't mean we can't do it ourselves. I'm just saying he will not be recommending anything about signs unless we add to his contract and add additional money to his contract. That's not to say we can't, in the overall process, can't address signs in the overall process.
We could do it without involving them in terms of, so it wouldn't impact their hours associated.
Right.
Okay.
Thank
I
you
think
all.
we have plenty of people in town that have opinions about signs.
Absolutely.
Any further comments from staff? So let me ask a question of the, we do need to close the public hearing and the record prior to make a recommendation to the city council. That's correct?
Yeah. I mean, in terms of your acceptance of new testimony and evidence, there needs to be an end before you deliberate. Obviously, when it goes on to council, council has a public hearing and accepts testimony and evidence, so it's not ultimately closed.
So if there's no further comment, is there a motion to close the public hearing and the record?
Richard, I'm sorry to be dense, but, so if we close the public record for this topic, it's just for this public hearing. So then if we suggest to the council that they nest this into the design review, nobody's impacted in terms of being able to participate or provide additional
There will
testimony.
be a public hearing before the city council, and that's obviously, the record's open, people can testify, people can submit evidence. So you closing the hearing and the record is just for purposes of, you're done taking evidence, you're now going to deliberate on what you have before you at this time.
Okay, thank you.
You have a motion in that regard?
I move we close the record and the public hearing on sign ordinance
2018-02.
dash 02. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The record and the public hearing are closed, and thank you for those who came tonight to testify before us. We appreciate that.
Does it matter that I don't agree?
Huh?
Nobody,
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you said yes.
I'm a nay.
So that 5 yeas and 1 nay. What is the pleasure of the commission? You heard what Richard said about, the need to make a recommendation to the city, and we can make a recommendation with some recommendations to go along with it.
Okay,
Patty.
and we have 60 days from when to make that recommendation?
2 weeks ago.
From 2 weeks ago?
2 weeks ago.
Okay. So we could, just thinking out loud here, we could ask planning staff to go through and make whatever changes need to be made to conform to the content-based issue,
Make that consistent.
right? And then, after that's completed, our recommendation to city council would be to take the sign ordinance in total and nest it into the design
Design
review
standard.
process.
Right. With input from the chamber.
Well,
Well,
I
that
think
would
the
be
design
part of the
review
public
process
testimony.
has input from the public at large as well, not just the chamber, so I would rather open it up to the entire public.
Any other further thoughts on that?
I really do think it has to be in a total package of the design of the community that we are living in, and I wholeheartedly support that motion that Patty has made.
Richard?
I'm not on the planning commission, but I do provide advice, and one of the things that you can't really direct the planning director to go off and do anything, or you can't direct him to amend a contract with a consultant to add signs. You're making a recommendation on a proposal that was given to you. I actually like your idea, but I guess it's not, you
You're
can't.
saying that direction needs to come from the
If you
council?
did sit on the planning commission, how
Well-
would you word it, Richard?
It's just that, again, you're not Richard's supervisor. You're appointed to make a recommendation on these ordinances. So I think Richard could take your recommendation and pass it along to the council.
Okay.
And then if the council likes that idea, I think then they'll indicate that, and Richard will talk to his boss about whether or not he's going to spend time and/or money doing that. So I just want to caution that you're not really
Right.
his boss,
Right.
so
No, I'm aware of that. Thank you.
that's my only clarification.
Okay, so I guess I have to word a motion. I would move that we, the recommendation to city council be that the current sign code amendments be limited to the content-based issues, yeah, and that the remainder of proposed sign code amendments be nested into the design standards review process.
Is there a second?
I second it.
Patty, may we have a roll call vote,
You
please?
mean Kate?
I mean, Kate, may we have a roll call vote, please?
Yes. McFarland,
Yes.
Schlesinger,
Yes.
Kier,
Yes.
Crowan,
Yes.
Cunningham,
Yes?
and Griffiths.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. All right. It is now 6:35
So,
PM, and the
Mr.
public
Chair.
hearing for file Z08, 2018-04, no, I'm sorry, -03 is now open. This public hearing concerns a city-initiated proposal to amend Title 17 zoning in Chapters 17.45 Taft Village Core and 17.50 Ocean Lake Plan District to reduce or eliminate off-street parking requirements for development in those zoning districts. The Planning Commission's role in the legislative process is to consider any written or oral comments or testimony, as well as information from staff, and present a recommendation to the City Council, who will hold an additional public hearing. The City Council may adopt the Planning Commission recommendation or may take other action. The Commission must take a few moments to cover some preliminary matters and required statements. Does any member of the Commission wish to declare a conflict of interest in this matter? Seeing none. The substantive criteria that apply to this hearing include the statewide planning goals, the city's comprehensive plan, and the applicable provisions of the city's zoning ordinance. Comments and testimony should be directed to these criteria or to other criteria that you believe apply to the subject of this hearing. Before the staff presents a report, I'll summarize the adopted public hearing procedures. The staff will present a report and respond to any questions. After that, any person may speak for up to 3 minutes. If your testimony includes questions, please direct them to me as the chair. We won't interrupt your testimony to answer questions. We may direct your questions to staff following your testimony. If the Planning Commission asks questions, your time responding to any questions will not be counted in your time limit. If you wish to speak, please write your name and mailing address clearly on the sign-up list at the entrance. Please speak directly into the microphone and begin by stating your name only. If you also have written testimony to submit into the record, please provide a copy to the recorder. Will the staff please present its report?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioners, in Taft and Ocean Lake, Urban Renewal in past years prepared some pretty extensive plans for those two areas, and actually invested millions of dollars in infrastructure upgrades, including undergrounding utilities and so on. The idea behind these plans and investments was that it would stimulate redevelopment in Taft and Ocean Lake. Unfortunately, to a large measure, the redevelopment has not occurred. This actually is Ocean Lake, and we believe that one of the main reasons that redevelopment has not occurred is because of the parking requirements that we have. On the left in this picture, you can see where the Bijou Theater is, and it's right there. And just to the left of it is a vacant lot. You may remember it's been there for years and years and years. And the reason that vacant lot has not redeveloped is because they can't put anything that's economic on it and put on the required parking. And similar constraint lies on almost all the property, especially along 101 and Ocean Lake. It's highly parcelized in separate ownerships. Assembling a developable piece of property is difficult given the requirement that we have for a really substantial amount of parking to go along with any development. So if you look at this picture, and most of Ocean Lake along 101 and even in Taft, you see very little in the way of new buildings. There's been some renovation of buildings, but even that, we have a requirement that if you do improvements to the building that exceeds 50% of the value of the existing building, then everything has to come into conformance, including parking. So that actually deters substantial renovation of buildings as well. So the proposal here is to eliminate the parking requirement for commercial buildings and also for the commercial part of mixed-use buildings in Ocean Lake and Taft. For residential uses in Taft, we don't propose to change the amount of required parking, which is already reduced to 1.5 spaces per unit. And then we would, again, in Taft, eliminate the provisions for relating to reduced parking requirements for mixed use, since there wouldn't be a need for that anymore. And the in lieu parking fee would also be eliminated in Taft, again, because there would be no reason for that. And we put that in so that it was sort of a safety valve for people that didn't want to provide or couldn't provide parking on the property. But nobody, in the 15 years it's been in the code, no one has used it. It's expensive and just didn't seem to attract the market at all. And we also eliminated or proposed eliminating the provisions regarding structured parking and joint use parking, and because there's no need for that if we eliminate the parking requirement itself. And we simplified the provisions relating to the location of parking in Taft. In Ocean Lake, we propose to eliminate the requirement for off-street parking for commercial and mixed-use projects on the Main Street Highway overlay zone, and for the commercial component of any mixed-use building in the other two parts of the Ocean Lake zone. And throughout, we've also made a number of grammatical changes to try to make the ordinance clearer. That's my staff report.
Does the commission have any questions of staff? Yes, Patty.
Does mixed use include residential? Is that what the
Yeah, it's
definition
mixed
of
commercial and
mixed use?
residential. It can be in the same building or in adjoining buildings on the same lot.
So in that case, would the parking requirement for the residential part of the mixed use be waived?
No.
Or,
Well,
because the way I'm reading it, it looks like you're eliminating the requirement for off-street parking for commercial and mixed-use
for
development.
Taft- For Taft, we're saying, right, in Taft, we're saying no parking even for the residential part of a mixed-use development.
And the logic behind that is what?
That there's, let the market decide how much parking to provide. There is substantial areas of on-street parking in Taft, as well as free public parking lots that the city has provided.
So if, hypothetically, if a mixed-use building were constructed and the residential part of that mixed-use building applied for a VRD permit, would they need to provide parking?
Yes.
So is that clear in the code?
Well, remember, the vacation rental has a whole separate set of standards, and this is a commercial zone where, in the broadest sense, I guess, a VRD, at least a full-time VRD, is not. It's a stretch to say it's residential, but in order to meet a VRD standard, it says you have to provide one parking space per bedroom.
Okay, so
And
that
this
would
doesn't
override
It
this.
doesn't do away with this, right?
Okay, I can just see where people might get caught in a catch-22 where they build a multi-use building, and then part of it becomes a VRD, and they have no place to put off-street parking. So then their VRD license would be denied?
Right.
Okay.
You wouldn't get your VRD land use approval.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All right. Now's the time for public, thank you, Richard. Now's the time for public comment and testimony. Do we have anybody who would like to testify on this issue? Yes, sir. You will have 3 minutes, and please speak directly into the microphone. Give us your name, but do not give us your address.
Thank you. I'm Gene Perella, live in Taft. Wondering, part of that explanation sounded okay, but the mixed-use requirement or elimination of parking for that, if an apartment complex were to go into Taft area, would the parking requirement be null and void, or what's the deal?
I'll get the question for that. Keep your testimony going, and I'll get the answer
Okay.
for you.
Anyway, at this point, there's enough problems with parking in Taft area as it is, with the trailer parks and such around there. It just, it's hard to find a place to park for the residents, let alone the guests, which we need to have for the tourists to come down there to make our community viable. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. And Richard, may I ask, if there's an apartment? Thank you.
An apartment complex just by itself would be required to provide parking. If it's part of a mixed-use project, then the way the ordinance is written, no, they would not be required to park.
So if there were stores on the first floor and apartment complex on the second and third, they would not need to have
Right.
parking requirements.
Yeah, the way the ordinance is written now.
But if it's solely an apartment building, it would have to have.
Right.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to testify? All right. Is there any comment from representatives of public agencies? If there is no further comment, is there a motion to close the public hearing and the record? Is there a
My
second?
turn.
I'll motion to close the record
And the public hearing?
and the public hearing.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the public record and the public hearing and the record are closed. So what is the pleasure of the commission? Is there a motion to forward a recommendation to the city council?
I just want to make one comment before you move to send this off. I agree with the comment that the gentleman made regarding apartments and places that could be constructed in a mixed-use environment and not require parking for those places. And if, 4 or 5 additional residential units without any parking can make a huge impact. This is I understand that, some larger cities are starting to reduce parking requirements, and people are finding that they can get around without a car, but I don't think that's this city. This city is an auto destination. Nobody can fly in here, nobody can take a train in here, the mass transit isn't here, so people drive. And I happen to live in a neighborhood that is a heavily used vacation area, and they don't come in 1 car or 2 cars, they come in 4 cars or 5 cars or 6 cars. And if you've ever driven around San Francisco looking for a place to park, I don't want to see those kinds of frustrations here. So I understand the commercial requirement for off-street parking is onerous. I would be comfortable with eliminating the requirement for off-street parking for commercial, but not for mixed use.
Mr. Chair, can I ask if you would be comfortable eliminating for the commercial part of a mixed-use structure?
Sure. I would be comfortable with that. But I think if there's a residential component to a building, there needs to be a parking space for the residents.
Like that. I was going to suggest something just like that. I think that's a great idea to keep the residential out of the mixed use. So in other
Not
words,
sure what you mean by that.
the residential non-parking out of the mixed use. So commercial part, fine, residential part,
Provide the
required
parking.
Do we have a motion to recommend this to the city council with that amendment?
I move that we forward this 50, let me make sure.
2018-0.
-03 parking requirements in Taft Village, but it's also Taft Village and Ocean Lake.
Right.
with the one stipulation that we remove the, let me see, that we would add that the residential part of a mixed-use facility would still require parking.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Patty, may we have, Kate, may we have a roll call, please?
I'll do it all.
All right. Cunningham,
Yes.
McFarland,
Yes.
Crowan,
Yes.
Schlesinger,
Yes.
Kier,
Yes.
and Griffiths.
Yes.
Motion carries.
So the City Council will hold a public hearing on this matter on Monday, December 10th, 2018, at 6 p.m. So, we're moving along here. It is now 6:51 p.m. The public hearing for file Z08 2018-04 is now open. I have a question for, never mind. This public hearing concerns a city-initiated proposal to amend Title 17 zoning in various chapters. These amendments include several ordinances. One, modifies the arborist requirements when tree removal is requested, reduces off-street parking requirements for residential uses. Two, defines 4 flat dwellings and allows them in most residential and commercial zones. 3, defines tiny house developments, establishes standards for such developments, and allows tiny house developments in the RM multiple family residential zone, the GC general commercial zone, and the RC recreation commercial zone. As a housekeeping matter, this ordinance also deletes an outdated code prohibition on permanent occupancy in approved recreational vehicle parks. The ordinance also includes a number of grammatical and wording changes regarding mobile home parks and recreational vehicle parks, but does not change development standards. The Planning Commission's role in the legislative process is to consider any written or oral comments or testimony, as well as information from staff, and present a recommendation to the City Council, who will hold an additional public hearing. The City Council may adopt the Planning Commission recommendation or may take other action. The Commission must take a few moments to cover some preliminary matters and required statements. Does any member of the Commission wish to declare a conflict of interest in this matter? Seeing none. All right. The substantive criteria that apply to this hearing include the statewide planning goals, the city's comprehensive plan, and the applicable provisions of the city's zoning ordinance. Comments and testimony should be directed to these criteria or to other criteria that you believe apply to the subject of this hearing. Before the staff presents a report, I'll summarize the adopted public hearing procedures. The staff will present a report and respond to any questions. After that, any person may speak up for up to 3 minutes. If your testimony includes questions, please direct them to me as a chair. We won't interrupt your testimony to answer questions. We may direct your questions to staff following your testimony. If the Planning Commission has questions, your time responding to any questions will not be counted in your time limit. If you wish to speak, please write your name and mailing address clearly on the sign-up list at the entrance. Please speak directly into the microphone and begin by stating your name only. If you also have written testimony to submit into the record, please provide a copy to the recorder. Will the staff please present its report?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. This is a group of separate ordinances, and the reason they're separate ordinances is in the past I've lumped several things in one ordinance, and the council hasn't liked that. They want to be able to treat each thing individually, so I've tried to not do some lumping, do splitting instead. So the first one I want to talk about is about tiny houses. That's ordinance number 2018-28. There is a lot of interest these days in tiny houses. Right now, the way our ordinances are written, we don't allow them in Lincoln City except as, not as a tiny house on wheels. This one in the photo here is actually a tiny house on wheels. We would allow them anywhere in the city that allows residential use on an individual lot. So in the R15 zone, where we have a 5,000 square foot lot minimum. You could have a tiny house on a foundation on a 5,000 square foot lot. The people, the idea behind the tiny house developments as we're describing them here is to allow them at a higher density, the similar density that we would allow in an RV park, or actually the same density we would allow in an RV park, or that we allow for multifamily dwellings in commercial zones. So just to show you several pictures of tiny houses. I mean, this is just I went to a tiny house construction site and took several pictures of. There's a lot of different kinds of them, and these are relatively simple ones. On the lot, I didn't take a picture of it. There was one that was just unbelievably ornate. It had a copper roof. I'm sure that tiny house, which was maybe 20 feet long and 8 or 9 feet wide, cost more than my house does. I mean, the detail work in it and everything was just incredible. These are the simpler ones. These are what I think what people are thinking of when they're thinking of tiny houses. So this is the interior of one. Most tiny houses don't have a regular bedroom. They have a loft, a sleeping loft, and you can see the ladder going up to the loft in this one. And that's been one of the concerns of the State Building Codes Division is if there's a fire, how do you get out of the loft? Because there's often just a ladder, and the egress window, if there is one, like you see there, doesn't meet the standard in most cases that we have for egress windows in bedrooms in stick-built homes that meet the building code. People are working on that, but the ordinance as I've presented them to you, one of the limitations that is proposed is that they be required to comply with whatever building codes apply. It's a dynamic situation right now, exactly what's going to happen with tiny houses under the building code. They can be built some ways, but not others, and so it's still being shaped out. But what we're proposing, actually, here's another one. This is one of the ones that shows how space utilization is done. Those shelves on the right, that's actually the stairway up to the sleeping loft in this one. But no railing. But
It's on the other side.
But so the proposal is that we allow tiny house developments of at least 4 tiny houses, a minimum of 5,000 square foot lot in the general commercial, recreation commercial, or multifamily residential zones. That is essentially double the density you could get with a single family home and a accessory dwelling unit on the lot. But again, it's the same density we allow for RVs in RV parks and for apartments in multifamily dwellings in or immediately adjacent to commercial zones. The idea behind this, again, as all these things that I'm discussing now, is they're related to helping to provide tools that promote workforce housing. These are generally less expensive than most stick-built houses of any size. By allowing them at the density we're talking about, it reduces the land cost. Requiring 4 parking spaces for 4 tiny houses just means one space per unit instead of the 2 that we require right now, although a little bit later this evening I'll get into another change that we're proposing. So the idea behind that, again, is to promote workforce housing. Related to that, though, is there's no guarantee that these are going to be inexpensive. Like I told you about the one I saw being built was going to be incredibly expensive. This is an ad for a 477 square foot tiny house in a tiny house development in Bend. This is not a dense development. not sure how many acres it is, but there's 22 units in this, and they've got all sorts of amenities that go with it. In this case, it's a lifestyle choice. People want to have a smaller dwelling, and they can, at what for Bend is probably a pretty good price, but I wouldn't call this cheap by any stretch of the imagination. And these homes are designed to have quality materials, quality furnishings, and that sort of thing. So I'm just pointing out that it doesn't guarantee affordability. It just is there so that if people want to build in an affordable way, they can.
And that's actually a little larger than how we define.
Right, we're defining a 400 square feet, yeah.
Up to 400 square?
Up to 400 square feet, yeah. And again, we don't have a limitation on house sizes in any of our residential zones, or any of our zones. A lot of places have like 1,000 square foot limitation. Actually, for a manufactured home in the residential zone, we require a minimum of 1,000 square feet, but for a stick-built home, we don't. So someone, like I said, someone could build one of these if it's on a foundation on any residential or commercial lot in the city, but this would allow it at higher density as well.
Did I hear you say the building codes are in
You're in a state
some
of
conflict
flux, yes.
with this? So are building codes being overhauled to allow for this kind of construction?
There are proposals for that, yes, and actually the state legislature has gotten involved, and so there's like I said, it's in a state of flux right now exactly what's going to be allowed. So the way we set it up again is we allow them to the extent the building code are going to allow them.
So, Richard, I have a question for you. I think I'm aware of at least one kind of smallish home here in Lincoln City that does have a sleeping loft, but that's permitted? Our code permits that?
If they have a suitable sized egress window or door, yes.
How's that defined? What's suitable?
It's square inches and certain minimum, two minimum, length and height, minimum dimensions, and then also a minimum square footage of them as well.
So that would be doable in any future tiny home here in Lincoln City?
Well, they may have a different standard for tiny homes. So there may be a separate code relating to tiny homes. I suspect that's where it's going to go.
And water hookup, don't we have some code that suggests you can only have one water line coming on to a lot?
Actually, you probably have as many water lines as you want to pay for. But the plumbing code would decide like how big a meter you would need. Like if you want to do on one lot, have 1 meter serving the 4 houses or the four tiny houses, it may require a slightly bigger meter. And then it would be the job of the developer to decide how,
But there
how
isn't
the water
anything that
bill and
would
sewer
preclude
bills.
someone from getting 4 individual
No,
water delivery lines to a single lot.
no,
Richard?
not that I'm aware of anyway.
Richard?
Yes. Go ahead, Mary.
Okay. My question, is this on city property, or is this
This would be-
just
this would be private.
anybody's?
This would be private.
Private? And would this go out to bid? What's
Well,
the
again,
process?
this is just saying, this is something that a developer could develop if they wanted to. It's not, the city is not going to undertake any of this. So this is not a city project.
So
It's,
basically, you're just kind of tilling the ground to say, this is available here if you want to
Right,
come do it.
right. I know there's been interest in allowing tiny home developments in the city, and this would do that.
Sean?
I know, go ahead.
My understanding is the potential for 4 tiny houses on a 5,000 square foot lot, or?
Right.
Am I wrong? Okay. I've looked at a lot of these in the recent months, and the pricing on these are somewhere in 150 to 175,000 a piece. that I've seen, and I don't like the idea that we're implying these are affordable. I mean, you may save some money on a lot by having 4 instead of, but
There are a lot of other places out there where if you get it built and delivered to you, they're $175,000. If you stick build a small house, it is $60,000. Yeah.
so we could get the cost down to where affordable really.
It really
might
depends on what
be.
the individual would want. If you want stainless steel everything and copper roofs and, spiraled, detailed wood, you're going to spend $400,000. If you want commercial grade products and maybe some aluminum siding and a tin roof that's effective and fits in within code, then you're going to not spend a lot of money. There are options. They're not all that.
Yeah. These ones here that I'm showing, these were, as I recall, $40,000 to $60,000.
Okay.
And Richard, does that 5,000 include the parking? So each tiny home would have a parking lot, or?
Right. And it's up to the developer to figure out how to do that.
Would this allow for an individual tiny home to be put on, did I read that correctly, that if you had a 1,200 square foot lot that,
No.
No?
It's saying it's a tiny house development, and you would have to have at least 4.
okay.
I think I attended one conference about tiny homes, and I think one of the points that some of the speakers made is that tiny homes were used to redevelop urban areas that had been sort of run down. This is a new way to redevelop some urban areas in town. And a lot of people were making lifestyle choices, moving out of larger homes into tiny homes. They just found that more convenient. Any other questions for Richard?
Are these going to be allowed to be used as vacation rentals?
Um,
I don't think they would meet, if they're having a hard time meeting fire code.
Well, we
for-
have, once again, we have standards that are drawn from the building code, and the egress windows is one of them, and these would not meet the egress window standard, at least as they're designed currently.
Unless you put a bigger window in.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if you could.
Or the stairway
That's really-
standard either, right?
Right, yeah.
Is that-
Okay. What I want to do is I'll just go through
Yeah.
all of them. So the next one is just the opposite of tiny houses. It's big houses. What we're proposing is to allow on a 10,000 square foot lot a 4-flat structure that basically the idea is that it looks like a big house, but it actually is 4 dwelling units in one structure. I deliberately chose the 10,000 square feet for 4 units. That's the same as we allow in the R15 zone right now with, if you had a main house and accessory dwelling unit, you'd have 2 units on 5,000 square feet. If you had 2 of those, then you'd have 4 units on 10,000 square feet. That's exactly the same that's being suggested here. So it's kind of a compromise, starting out as a compromise where I'm sure you see the comment from one big house developer saying he can do it on a much smaller lot. I tried to sort of not go that route because I thought there probably would be a substantial amount of opposition to that, where you would have on a 5,000 square foot lot, you could end up with 4 dwelling units, and there's traffic and parking, I think, would be a concern for people. So what I'm saying is 4 units on a 10,000 square foot lot, 4 parking spaces in one structure. The reason why this is promoted towards workforce housing is that, as a general rule, it's cheaper to build 4 units in one building than it is to build 4 separate buildings. So it's just, again, to promote the affordability. So I got a bunch of examples here. All these I'll go through. They're all 4-unit big houses. This is really the kind of thing I've been imagining, like this one where you look at it, that's a big house, but it actually is four units. This is a little bit different. Again, it's 4 units. You can see in the back what looks like it might be 2 houses are connected in the back there. So it's one building with 4 dwelling units in it. In the definitions or in the description, they say a single entrance for going into a central hallway or something. That is not necessarily needed, and we might want to think about taking that out and allowing separate entrances. Like this has 4 entrances. This one has, actually, I think this one has 4 entrances too, but 2 of them go down under the building into the apartments, the basement apartments. But then this is basically 2 main floors, but there is a habitable attic and habitable basement under it, so there'd be 4 units in there. And that's again what one of your commenters was talking about. Rather than just saying it has to be 2 stories, as long as it can have like a daylight basement and a habitable attic, then that would be much more amenable. And I think that makes a lot of sense, because this still looks like basically a 2-story house.
Yeah, another suggestion too, that it, we don't be so restrictive and say it has to be 2-bedroom or less.
Right, yeah, I think you go up to 3-bedroom, I think that would be fine.
3-bedroom, but a couple of studio apartments or
Yeah,
something.
However they
It's more of
configure
just
4
open it up
units.
to the market.
Maybe they can fit 4 2-bedroom units, or 3 and 1 3-bedroom, however they can figure it out,
Right.
whatever
Yeah.
the design will allow.
And this one has a big house. You can see it's got 4 doors, but it still looks like just one big house. And this is one that was built by that commenter. This was a house. He jacked it up a little bit, put a daylight basement under it, and then had the attic, in fact, is habitable with the light coming from the dormers there. And this is another one of his. This is where I start to get nervous about this, because to me this doesn't look like a 2-story house. And it was a 2-story house that he jacked up and put a basement under it, but it's not that basement-y to my eye. This looks like a 3-story house to me, and then plus a habitable attic on top of that. But this is on a much smaller lot than this is just a
Do you know what
standard.
the height dimensions of that are?
I don't know on that.
I think he said he kept everything at the 36, standard 2-story at the peak.
In Rhodes End, we have a maximum height of 30 feet, and in most other residential zones, we have 35 feet. But again, also, just like the tiny houses, the fact that this is allowed doesn't guarantee that the structure, that the units are going to be cheap. These 2 actually, I couldn't afford to live in either of these last 2 that I showed you. They're very expensive. But, that's the market that they were built in. So that's what I have on 4 flats, big houses.
I missed something you said earlier, Richard, about this one, about entrances. We might want to consider changing.
The 1 single entrance to.
Yeah, I said
being-
that I would be amenable to that, sure.
Didn't the, the new zoning for Rhodes End that we spent a fair amount of time on exclude multi-family dwellings on those lots up
Yes,
there?
yes,
And
it did.
duplexes?
This would change that.
Okay.
What is your concern?
We spent a lot of time working with the people that live in Rhodes End on that new zoning, and one of the things that they were very concerned with was addition of more duplexes and more density, more cars, since Rhodes End has 25% of the homes up there are currently VRDs, and a sizable number of them are in a tsunami inundation zone. I don't think it makes a lot of sense to put more people up there at this point, so. And the fact, like I said, the fact that we spent a lot of time working through those zoning ordinances, the new ordinances for Rhodes End. I would hate to see us go in so soon and strip out something that,
We do need structures like this. If developers can build some nice-looking rental properties that aren't too big, like an apartment complex, and so I like these. I definitely understand what you're saying. I think there's some areas that this may not be the most appropriate, but I think it should be allowed somewhere.
I
And you're
agree
saying,
with
Richard,
that. I think they should be allowed somewhere. I just don't think they should be.
And
The
they would
proposal-
require a 10,000-foot square lot.
Right.
Which I don't think there are any in Rhodes End.
Well, you don't need a 10,000 square foot lot, you need two 5,000 square foot lots, and there's lots of those, and
Oh.
so,
Yeah, see.
So if somebody combined two 5,000 square foot lots into a 10,000 square foot lot to build a fourplex, that would, in terms of the VRD issue, depending on what zone they're in, it would be what kind of,
well, remember in Rhodes End, for example, the cap of VRDs is 90 VRDs, and we're at 200 right now,
Yeah,
so
so
it'll be a long
there's
time.
no-
but
Nobody-
would it be considered an R17?
It's in the R1,
Right,
in
in
the
any
R,
zone.
in the Rhodes End district, it's going to be considered, it's in the Rhodes End district. In the R15 zone, we are at the cap. We have a waiting list that we're drawing people off of already. And again, it's going to be subject to the cap. In the R175 zone, where we don't allow VRDs except for accessory use VRDs, a maximum of 30 nights per year, you could have your unit be VRD for 30 nights a year. And the proposal
this-
here is that they be allowed in the R1 zone, which include R15 and R175, the R1RE, the Rhodes End zone, the VR zone, which is the vacation residential zone, multifamily residential zone, recreation, commercial, general commercial, Taft Village Core, and Ocean Lake Plan District zones.
Miles?
If this is sold as a condominium, doesn't it have to have a condominium association approval before getting one person to decide he wants to make his unit a VRD?
I think that would depend on the terms of the condominium agreement.
But to remodel one, you've got to have a plan for the association, whether it's 4 units or 40 units, don't you?
I believe that's true. yeah.
Okay.
Any further questions of Richard?
Yeah,
Yes.
this would require the same parking, though, as a fourplex. I mean, you're going to need a space per each.
Yeah, I think it's one space per unit is what we say.
Each four-flat dwelling must have a minimum of 4 off-street
Right.
parking spaces.
Right.
And it's
So that
really,
would prohibit VRDs then, right?
Assuming that they're, have more than one bedroom, yes. Actually, it says,
No,
I think we have a
unless they-
minimum of 2 for VRDs, so yes, that's, so 1 per bedroom with a minimum of 2 for VRDs, so basically, it would preclude it.
Unless they stack them.
No,
mean,
well,
This is
well,
the minimum,
this is
not
the
a
minimum.
maximum parking, so.
If you can figure out how to put the parking on and still meet the lot coverage standards and landscaping standards and so on, maybe, but,
the theory, though, is to get density in the current space that we have, and theoretically affordability through the density. I mean, that's
Right,
what we're
right.
trying to do here. Okay.
No, not so much through the density, we already allow the same density, but reduce the construction costs.
And again, what zones would these be, could these be built in?
R15, R175, R1RE, which is roads end, RM, multifamily residential, general commercial, recreation commercial, the VR zone, which is vacation.
So it might be an
rental
opportunity to redevelop some areas in the general commercial zone.
zone. Yeah, and also Taft Village Core and Ocean Lake Plan District.
So it'd be easier to say where would they not be allowed?
Professional campus, park, open space.
Industrial.
Marine waterway, Nelscott, planned industrial,
Not in Nelscott.
No, the planned industrial area.
not in Nelscott. There's so many, I don't think there's just so many little tiny lots. I just didn't see how it would even be possible, and the scale of things that the Nelscott plan calls for is really smaller structures. So just not allowing them is trying to keep that small structure character.
So someone wouldn't be able to amalgam several lots together and,
Not in Nelscott. It's not called out as being allowed there, assuming that this goes into effect.
Any further questions on this one? And there's one more?
Actually, there's more.
Parking.
First is about residential parking. This would reduce the off-street parking requirements for residential development.
we
For
did
one and
that,
two,
right?
I'm sorry?
Did we do that one?
first.
Did we do that one? Have we discussed that
No.
one? already?
No.
no,
No, this is a different parking one.
we did commercial.
This is for one and two family dwelling units, among others, but it would reduce the parking, number of parking spaces required would vary based on the size of the dwelling. So, it's on page 81 of your packet. So instead of 2 spaces per dwelling unit, the proposal is 1 space for a house of 700 or a dwelling unit of 700 square feet or smaller. Between 700 and 1,000, it'd be 1.5 spaces per unit, but you round up. So a duplex would require 3, a single family would require 2. Over 1,000 square feet would keep the 2 per unit that we have now. Also would reduce multifamily to 1 space per unit instead of the 2 that we require now. Mobile home park, 1 instead of the 2 that we require now. And would eliminate the elderly parking reduction because the multifamily reduction would already take care of that. So there'd be no need for that, for the elderly housing unit distinction anymore.
Isn't the elderly housing unit distinction used in apartment complexes sometimes to
Right.
reduce the number?
Exactly, but we're proposing to just say 1 parking space for apartment house, per apartment.
Okay. One per apartment, regardless of the number of bedrooms
Right.
that apartment has.
Right. That's the proposal.
Any questions?
Again, this is aimed at reducing the cost of
Right.
production of a apartment complex or whatever.
Right. Apartment complexes and single-family and duplex homes as well.
Do you have any data to suggest that people have fewer cars? Just a curiosity.
There is data, I don't have anything specific to Lincoln City. There is data elsewhere. Actually, I had meant to do a parking study, see what we do at apartments right now, but did not get a chance to do that.
And there's one more?
Yeah, there's the tree protection plan provisions. The proposal is to allow the Planning and Community Development Director, in consultation with the city engineer, to waive some or all of the requirements for a tree protection plan. So that, right now, the tree protection plan has to be prepared by a certified arborist. There has to be a survey by a surveyor showing where the trees are, what trees and how they're going to be protected. It's not outrageously expensive, but it can be expensive. And in fact, we lost a cottage cluster development because of the arborist requirement. So I wanted to be able to have a provision saying that for a workforce housing project such as a cottage cluster or a tiny home development, that the some or all, and that would be a judgment call based on the details of the specific proposal of the tree protection plan, could be waived.
For a workforce housing project.
For a workforce housing project.
Do we
Now,
need
the
to
obvious glitch in there is how do you know it's a workforce housing project? And it probably would be worth having a provision saying something designated by either the community development director or the planning commission or the city council or the city manager, something like that, where someone's making a decision on whether it is a workforce housing project.
I mean, my concern is like a developer might say, well, I have a couple of units that are being that will be sold at below market cost, and that's workforce housing.
Oh.
But, yeah, I just think we need a little bit, that needs to be a little tighter, or it needs a bit more review, yeah. Maybe adding the planning commission to it, to say the city engineer and the director of planning will obtain the planning commission's approval for.
Or it could say for a workforce housing project, we designated as such by the planning commission.
So how do you do that? I mean, we're talking about economics here, right? And
Talking about what?
economics and how much a place would be sold for. So how do you, I'm not sure how you legislate that. How do you decide what is workforce housing? Is there a formula, and is that something that is?
Well, typically,
We can
it's what's
apply.
affordable to someone, the way we're defining it right now. The dwelling unit would be affordable to somebody earning, I think, 80 to 120%, or maybe we want to do it 80 to 100% in this particular context of the median income.
Of the median income in Lincoln City, or in the state, or in the county?
It's easy to get the data on county. I believe we can do it through census on the city as well, so we could do that.
So with the workforce in Lincoln City being primarily service industry people, that I would suspect that number could be skewed somewhat.
Well, again, it's median, so it's not average, it's median, and so that helps to take care of the upper end outliers that we have, as well as the lower end outliers. So median is what's used typically in defining what is so-called affordable housing, and that's in with our economic development projects and our negotiations that we have now on city properties that we're selling. That's what we use, is the percentage of median income.
Richard, I'd like to, have in this ordinance, though, something that says that all the housing being used in these developments where we're giving them the break on this, that all the housing units be affordable. I mean, not some of them.
Commercial.
Right. Let's just hold their hands to the fire and say you won't sell or rent something to someone else at a higher cost when you're getting this benefit. Just hold their hands to the fire big time.
Miles?
Richard, I was a builder since 2000, but I built a home on the side of a hill overlooking Beaverton for myself in 1987, 88. And I clear-cut the land, and I didn't know any better than to chop down, and I sold the timber and got some amount of dollars for it. I think doing away with an arborist is a big mistake, even for workforce housing, and we could give a credit on the sewer connection hookups or whatever we do for that, and it would be much better. Trees are an important part of the environment for taking care of water and the environment, basically, and I don't believe that even for workforce housing, there are other ways to make it cheap enough to develop the property.
Does the city have budget to kick in for some of that?
We have an affordable housing fund, which I believe right now is pretty close to empty because we used it in purchasing the Villages of Cascade Head property. And presumably as we sell parts of the Villages of Cascade Head property, Affordable Housing Fund will be reimbursed, so there will be some money. I think there can be other sources of money. Because it's not a land use issue, you're not seeing it tonight, but there is another ordinance that goes with this that I've taken to the City Council that would have a construction excise tax to fund, to go into the Affordable Housing Fund. It's been authorized by state law a couple of years ago, and a lot of communities around the state, including Newport, have adopted it as a means of raising money for affordable housing. Some places use it to pay SDCs, system development charges. Some places use it for land purchase or for other subsidies.
That's an excise tax on commercial and residential development?
It can be.
The one that you put forward?
That I've written, yes.
The one that you've written
Yeah.
covers both?
And it would be, the way it's written is it's at a rate that is determined by resolution of the council. Typically, I won't say typically, I should say sometimes what is done is like 1% for commercial and 0.5% for residential is what you see.
And have you looked at the impact that that's had on other municipalities that have enacted such a law?
Impact in what sense? It's raised.
Well,
It raises
you
a little
mentioned
bit of
earlier
money.
that we lost a cluster housing because the developer couldn't afford to have, or didn't choose to have the arborist do the study. I don't know how much an arborist costs relative to what that excise tax would be, but I'm assuming it sounds like the margins are slim, and any increase in the cost of development is going to have an impact on whether they build here or not. So my question is, in proposing an excise tax, can you enlighten us into how that might impact builders who want to build here?
There is, I think, some anecdotal information. My understanding is it's a pretty insignificant. Obviously, there's a conflict there between you want to have affordable, and the first thing you do is raise the price,
right,
by 0.5% or 1% or whatever it is that you do. But the proposal would exempt a lot of different structures, including those that are supposed to be for affordable housing projects. So it wouldn't increase.
So you wouldn't charge them to fill their...
Wouldn't tax you to make it affordable. So. But again, that's not before you.
Yeah.
And
Can I ask a little clarification? The cottage cluster that you see, that we feel like we lost, was it because of the cost of the arborist or the cost of of not being able to take care of getting the trees off the lot and thereby building the cottage.
It was the cost, what the developer told me, it was the cost of the arborist.
Do you know what that
Any-
was?
Pardon me?
Do you know what that cost was?
It was less than 10,000, I know that.
But
It was probably.
Scheduling.
Probably half that. It's-
scheduling costs time in construction, and when you got to wait 4 months for an arborist, that time costs money. And I think that plays a factor in, it's not like you can find an arborist everywhere. So I think that's a big factor from the contractors that I've spoken with. Say it's not about the cost so much, it's about scheduling the right time, and that adding a very uneasy scheduling part of your concept when construction, as we all know, never goes according to plan. So adding another part of the difficulty to the planning is off-putting, I can see. Yeah, I don't want to lose more trees than we have to, but I can see how that's a rough bit.
Any further questions of Richard?
Well, yeah. I'm sorry.
One more.
One more. So the suggestion here is that, that the Planning and Community Development Director, in consultation with the city engineer, could waive any or all of the tree protection and replacement plans. So what would you use to determine, I mean, you're going to go out on a piece of property and you're going to look at trees?
Well,
And you're going to decide?
They're
No.
looking at the
What
project.
we're going to do is look at what the proposal is. Like in this particular case, it was not only was there an expense, it was kind of silly because it was a small enough site and there'd be enough roadway and parking and housing that basically he's going to cut down all the trees. So to have an arborist come in and say, okay, here's the trees you have, and have a surveyor saying, and this is where they are, and then once you get that approved, you cut them all down, didn't make a lot of sense.
So, as I need to go back and reread the tree ordinance again. So basically, I mean, there are trees that are protected in our tree ordinance. Please say yes.
There is something called a protected
Size-wise?
tree, and that can be a tree that is called out as a protected tree in the tree protection plan, or that.
And do you, as the community development director or planning director, know which those trees are? Or do you need an arborist to tell you that?
No, it's in that case, it's the developer himself saying, I'm not going to cut this tree.
Part of their landscape plan?
So, yeah, so we can say, okay, that's a protected tree, so you have to leave that.
Okay, but that's self-regulation. If they choose to, they could cut that protected tree down.
No, because it's against the law to cut down a protected tree.
Okay, this is probably a discussion for another time, but I'm a little confused on the whole tree.
It can be confusing. Our tree protection ordinance is,
some work.
Needs work.
yeah, it's complex. And, it was a reaction to a situation we had right around the recession where we had a large development basically blitzed the site, and then
I know the development.
it just stayed bare and empty for years.
Still is.
Any further questions?
Nope.
Okay. Thank you, Richard. Now is the time for public comment and testimony. Would anyone like to testify on this particular ordinance? Yes, come forward, state your name, please. You will have 3 minutes. Don't give us your address.
My name is Paul Gerlach, and got questions. Just not clear on a couple.
Could you speak?
I'm not clear on a couple issues there. That you're speaking about workforce housing and affordability, and my question, I guess, is who is it going to be affordable for? The individuals that are trying to move in, or the builders? And I can see with the parking issues that I think are going to be huge if you're moving.
Could you be?
With the parking issues of allowing one parking spot, instead of multiple, those people are going to have to park someplace. I just see a big cluster, and with a guarantee about how much is it going to cost for the person to rent that place. And, I don't know, to me, it's just kind of sounding like the contractor, is cutting parking, cutting a lot of areas, and I'm not sure who it's going to be affordable for. It'll be affordable to build, but who's going to live in it? And I guess that's kind of my questions of what exactly is it for? How is this better than just building an apartment complex? If we're trying to be affordable and save money, and if we're going to fund these things, then I think contractors, they got the money to build, and if we're looking for affordability and people to move into, I don't know, maybe apartments should be given a little more support, to get people in, multiple people, not 4 people in a neighborhood that's they're gonna have to park. I mean, I don't know, I just see a lot of issues, of who's making money here. But thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. I think that's always an issue as to how are the savings passed on to the potential residents.
Can I respond to him?
Yes.
The average cost to build here is about $150 a square foot. That gets passed on. I mean, just like any other business, if it costs them so much for their supply, they're going to add a little markup so that they can keep paying their employees and other bills, and that's how it goes. Most contractors, they're not out there tripling anything on anybody. They're trying to build these things. They're always in here talking to us, trying to get us to lower things so that they can make things more affordable. It's expensive here, and the location is our problem. It's expensive to get product here. It's expensive to get crews here. It's expensive to put crews up because there's nowhere for them to stay other than a hotel at $70, $80 a night. All those things add up, and the person who buys the house pays for that. That is a big problem. Most of it is, half of your home's property value is the land. If somehow we could do something where there was land to be developed without the cost being applied, then you could really tackle affordability. But that's a big dream without somebody's help. And I'm not sure we can count on profit makers like developers to do that for us. Even if they wanted to, they can't sustain their business without it.
Thank you, Sean. Yeah. Are there any further individuals who would like to testify tonight? Is there any comment from representatives of public agencies? If there is no further comment, is there a motion to close the public hearing and the record? Is there any motions to close?
I'll move that we close the public hearing and record on ZOA 2018-04.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the record and the public hearing are closed for 2018-04. What is the pleasure of the commission?
We have three distinct.
Huh?
We have three
Microphone.
We have three very distinct.
We do, and we should discuss them one by one, so why don't we do that in the order that Richard
5.1?
presented them to us. And the first one was the parking, right?
Tree ordinance and parking combination?
No.
Wait,
No,
why don't we
The
do it
first
in the
one
order
was-
that it's presented in our
yeah,
All right, we
report?
can do that.
the big houses would be
Four
first.
So the
Flat.
4 flat.
Okay. I don't have any stomach for changing the zoning in Rhodes End right now. We just did it. And this just feels, it doesn't feel right. I think R1 and R1RE should be excluded from this. We have zoning for multifamily
R1
and R1RE. I think that the rest of the zones, can accommodate multifamily, but I don't want to see us change the zoning in Rhodes End right now, since we just finished doing it, and I think R1 for similar reasons. So I would rather strike those two zones from the ordinance.
And I suggest striking perhaps the vacation rental zone as well.
The what now?
Vacation rental zone as well.
I'd be okay with that.
Richard, real quick, I know you said Nelscott is exempt from allowing these, or will not be allowing the 4 flats. What about the other side of the highway in the prospective new developments? Will that be allowed on that side?
That's in the
Still,
Nelscott gap.
Nelscott-
It's still being planned, so at this point, I don't have an answer for you.
Well, that's not part of the historic area, right?
Can we make a
Right,
clarification?
It's not. So chances are that they would be allowed there.
Maybe we can make a clarification of the, excluding
I think that
historical.
Is that distinguished in that they couldn't be in Nelscott? Oh, it's not.
It hasn't been zoned
It
yet.
hasn't been zoned Nelscott there, so we're still in the process of writing the zoning for the Nelscott gap area.
So there could be areas in there that are multifamily residential, and it would be in there.
Okay. I'll bring it up later.
If
other
I could just respond a little bit, allowing this in the multifamily zone really doesn't accomplish much because we already allow apartments there. The idea is specifically, and I understand you don't have the stomach for it, the idea is specifically to allow them in single-family zones. That's the intent. And so we have parts of the Ocean Lake Plan District, Taft Village Core, and the other zones, even though they have commercial zones or whatever, they are developed as single-family neighborhoods. And again, the intent is to integrate these kinds of structures into single-family neighborhoods.
Would you be amenable to, Patty,
Yes, sir?
to prohibiting the fourplexes in the VR and the road end zone? And-
Yeah, I'm concerned about the same things in the R1, that the idea of parking and, changing the feeling of these residential areas. I guess the Rhodes End has the overlay of it's already a marginally safe place to begin with, and it's overwhelmed with VRDs right now, so the number of people up there is way more than I think the carrying capacity. So I guess R1 would be okay. The VR, is that the other issue, whether or not we leave them in the VR zone? I'd be okay with that.
Allowing them or
Yeah,
excluding?
yeah, you can allow them.
Exclude them, but
You would exclude them from VR because,
density, yeah.
Sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
Density, yeah. I would recommend excluding 4-flat dwellings in any VR zone.
I'm not sure the reasoning is,
It
because,
just increases greater density, I think, yeah.
well,
Although I'm not sure
the parking requirements will still be there.
there will be no more future VR zones, right?
Right.
Now, I don't have a
And,
problem with them moving VRs out and putting in a place where long-term residents can dwell.
Yeah, I don't mind them being in the VR. Maybe we could put a max parking spaces on these types so that they will not
Well,
meet.
again, they would have to have the proper number of parking
Right,
spaces
so-
that we operate as a VR.
So no more than 6
That might be
spaces for a 4-flat, and then they will never be a VRD.
Mr. Chair, if I can also add, again, the 10,000 square feet, I chose that specifically because you're not increasing the density that's already allowed in the R1 or R1RE zone. You're just putting it under one roof instead of 4 roofs.
Thank you, yeah.
Except
Okay, so
that during
I'm
the
fine with
zoning
that.
of the RE zone, they specifically, I mean, the neighborhood specifically did not want to see duplexes or triplexes or fourplexes, any additional ones in the neighborhood. So I'm responding to what the community required or requested. And we approved that in their zoning. So now to go back and change that
got it.
now, it's not right.
Any further comments on this? So your recommendation would be to yes, except for the road's end zone, right?
Yeah.
Right, go on to the next one. Tiny houses.
No, the next one's the tree protect, I mean, if we're going in the packet order.
No, the next one's tiny houses.
Oh, I'm sorry, I see it at the
Big
bottom.
house.
My bad.
So tiny houses, any questions about that? I wanted to go, excuse me, I wanted to go back to the the fourplex one and say we should allow multi-stories. We don't have to limit them to 2 bedrooms or single access. I think we should make that change.
Yeah.
Within the
That'll
height,
be-
within the height
I don't know,
requirements of the
Mr. Chair, do
zone.
you want to do motions as you go along?
Yeah,
To
let's
make
do that.
recommendations?
Then we don't have to come back. Let's go back to the where were we?
4 flats,
It's getting late.
big houses.
The 4 flat dwellings, is there a motion to recommend that ordinance with the change that they can be multi-story within the height limit, they don't have to be limited to 2 bedrooms, or they don't have to be limited to a separate entrance? They can have multiple entrances.
And you don't want them in the R1, RE zone?
And we
Is that
don't
what-
want them in
Correct.
the R1, RE zone. Is there a motion for that? Is there a second?
I second that.
May we have a roll call vote, please? Kate?
Sure,
Good job.
it's okay. Crowan,
Yes,
Cunningham,
Yes.
McFarland,
Yes.
Kier,
Yes.
Schlesinger,
Yes.
and Griffiths.
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right, now we're on tiny houses.
Actually, can I ask you to back up a little bit, just so for my understanding? When you say multi-story, you mean like with a daylight basement and a habitable attic?
Yeah, as long as it's within the height limit.
Okay, so would you allow something that's obviously 3 stories?
Yes.
Is that the intent of everybody else? I just want to get that clear.
I'm fine with it as long as it remains within the height requirements of the zone.
I'm all right with that.
I mean, we have buildings like that now, for
mean, if
example, in my neighborhood.
The building's not taller and just being used
Yeah.
more efficiently, it's not
Yeah,
a
I
problem.
just know there's been a lot of negative reaction to 3-story houses, and so I just wanted to,
As long as it doesn't add an actual height of 3 stories, but can be used appropriately.
35.
well, again, that's what I'm trying to get at.
That's what we're saying. As long as it doesn't exceed our current 2-story height limit, however they can use this space.
We don't have
We
a
don't have a
2-story,
we
two-story
don't
height
have
limit.
one of those.
We have,
35
we have a
foot.
35-foot height limit.
which is technically 2 stories.
How'd we get all the 3-story houses?
You tell us.
It will accommodate 3 stories.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of those places that meet our 35-foot height requirement can have a dormer attic in them as it is and be a livable space. So, I mean, I'm just thinking if people can use their space appropriately without exceeding the height, why not?
I just
I
want
think
to
that's
make
what we're
sure
getting at.
what,
Huh?
I just want to make sure that I understood what you all
So
were.
are we all, we're in agreement on that, right?
so.
Gary?
Yeah.
I guess I'd like to hear more of this argument that people are objectionable to 3-story houses. So I can, people don't like 3-story houses.
I particularly don't like 3-story VRDs.
Yes.
I heard a lot of that, and so there are 3-story houses that presumably aren't VRDs, but even in Rhodes End with a 30-foot height limit, there's 3-story houses. So I just wanted to make sure I understood I originally had said 2 stories. We had a commenter say 2 stories with a daylight basement and a habitable attic. And so what I'm hearing now is it could be 3 stories or whatever, even with a habitable attic, and you're fine with that as long as it doesn't violate the height limit.
Are you fine with it,
That's what I'm fine with. yeah.
Gary?
Well, I have a 3-story house. I'm in a commercial zone, or something like that, so I'm okay.
All right, yes. I think
Okay.
we're fine.
Thank you.
So we're now on to tiny homes. Any comments on that? Can we have a motion to approve that ordinance?
So this is not suggested to be in residential zoning?
In multifamily residential, yes.
Only.
But general commercial and recreation commercial.
Okay.
Is there a motion to approve? Ordinance 2018-28?
I motion to approve.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
I'll second it. May we have a vote, please? Kate?
Cunningham,
Yes.
Schlesinger,
Yes.
Crowan,
Yes.
McFarland.
Yes.
Sean is not in the building. And Griffiths.
Yes.
Okay, motion carries.
Moving along. 2018-27, the tree removal,
This is,
Tree protection
tree
and
protection.
and
replacement
parking
plan.
reduction.
Section 1. I'm concerned about, I think we need, on pocket page 78, I think the Director of Planning and Community Development in consultation with the city engineer and the Planning Commission, do we want to add that? May waive some or all of the requirements of this subsection for a workforce housing project.
Yes, I'd like that.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
That would require that any time they try to do this, they would have to bring it to us at the Planning Commission to get authorization?
It would.
Why are these linked?
Pardon me?
Why are these things
I
linked?
don't have a good explanation for that.
Okay, because I can be for one and I'm not going to be for the other one, so.
You can recommend accordingly. I want to ask the city attorney, if we have a provision in here that says in consultation with the planning commission, are we then talking a hearing with notice and an appeal?
That's what we don't want.
Pardon me?
Yeah, I think if we could do it without that.
Don't want a hearing. Generally, your job is not to make that kind of administrative decision, but.
Is there another body we could substitute for the planning
Who would you
commission?
appeal to if, you know, the decision isn't, you know, so the city council gets to hear it? See, I think you're better served as the appeal body for decisions rather than the original decision, so. I can't.
What
tell
would
you-
be a good alternative to that then? Any suggestions?
I still don't think we should do away with an arborist. I think the arborist is a link like an engineer, like a structural engineer or anyone else who's involved in planning a cottage cluster or any kind of a single-family home or a fourplex.
All right.
Generally, what you have here is a decision of the, you know, the planning director and the engineer to waive the requirements, but I'm not sure that there's a threshold, you know, it has to be, meet your definition of what workforce housing is. Is that clear enough? Is that?
No. And I think Gary had a good suggestion too earlier, that that housing project would have to be 100% workforce housing. Is that what you said, Gary?
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, and that's been an issue in the past when we've going back to a specific project that we had and the negotiation to be annexed to was in a development agreement. We asked for like 10% or 20% of the units to meet a certain range, and they were like, well, how about 10%? And so you might want to set a standard for, rather than you weigh in, maybe you should recommend that Richard and staff come up with a more fixed standard for them to meet, so it's not, doesn't appear as it's more discretion.
I could come up with a standard, and it would say that if we're going to not have an arborist, it's 100% workforce housing, or you need an arborist.
And then workforce
People that
housing
live in
being,
workforce housing like
workforce housing being
trees.
defined as the 80 to 100, 120, whatever it is that we're using as our standard definition.
Is that family income or individual income?
Depends.
Okay,
Depends on whether the house is for a family or individual.
Okay, well then, if it's specific, if it can be laid out specifically, like a 1 or a 2 bedroom can be applied to an individual, and 2 to, 4 bedroom applied to family, okay.
Patty?
But the whole property, to get to the exclusion, the whole property that's being developed is going to be sold, rented at that level, or just bring in your arborist. You got plenty of money.
I think you've got plenty of.
Patty has the floor.
I think, I would like to see two things. I'd like to see this ordinance split up. I didn't hear a good reason why tree protection and residential parking reduction are joined. So I want to see those separated out, and I'd like to see more specifics with regard to identifying affordable housing and workforce housing for the tree protection part of it.
I don't like workforce housing being thrown in with affordable and workforce in the same sentence, because one is distinctly different than the other.
Yeah,
And what
they're
I'm
together.
saying is, I want to see a break for the workforce, not the affordable, because affordable, professionals are affordable. Workforce people don't have jobs if they can't get to work. And if they can't live in the area, which a lot of our people are in that condition right now, Otis and beyond, we have a real problem that we seem to kick the can down the road. And so I wanted to hear workforce housing, and I wanted to hear, that's where we give you an exemption. We don't give you an exemption for affordable housing, because
Well, it
I don't
doesn't say
like that.
It's just for workforce.
I realize that, but she was bringing in workforce and affordable.
Well, no, the sentence under section 1, it says that you can waive any and all tree protection and replacement plan requirements for workforce housing projects such as a city council designated affordable housing development, a cottage cluster, or a tiny
What
house
page are
development.
you
So they're all
on?
mushed in. Packet page 63, the first paragraph under section C.
Actually, I was reading that, and I had planned on putting in something that the city council would designate it as a workforce housing
Okay,
project.
the terms are a little loose.
Yeah, a little murky.
I think there are a lot of ways that the city can compensate a developer for providing sewer fees, a credit on sewer fees, or all kinds of things, and it doesn't have to be sacrificing the environment. And
Agree with that.
Okay. So, it looks like we're not making much headway on section 1 of 2018-27.
So would you like to see it brought back with some additional changes?
Can we do that if you've already closed the public hearing in the record?
Could reopen it.
Yeah. I'd
Yes,
like to
I
see
think
it
that's the
split up.
consensus.
Split it into two.
I agree.
Split it into two, okay.
Yep.
Well, let's go, can we move forward on section 3 of this? Section 2 of this,
It's just section 2.
the parking.
Parking, yes.
No, it's part of the same
Oh, I
ordinance.
thought, yeah, I thought this was to
Yeah,
be
so, okay, so, no,
divided.
so we're back to the planning department with this one then.
For the whole thing?
Huh?
For,
Yeah.
What's the concern about parking?
well, for 2018-27, it's joint tree protection and residential parking reduction, so I would.
I can break it into two ordinances,
I would like that.
which we can do. My question is, do you want, you want the tree protection one to come back to you? What about the parking one?
Yes.
Well, that
Yes.
one, what are your concerns about that?
I don't have any concerns. Does anybody else have any concerns?
Well, again, I don't think there's any evidence we have fewer cars, and I'm concerned about, particularly parking in areas where there are VRDs and people are bringing 4 or 5 cars with them and taking up street parking.
I
That
think-
if there's a reduction of off-street parking requirement for residential development, those residents are going to need to find a place to park. And I don't know where they're going to park. So.
I think there's a possibility of there being a market for people who only have one car and no cars, but.
I think there's a large market for that.
I think there really is, yeah.
I get your Patty, I definitely understand where you're coming from. We don't have the transit to back up less cars. So, but one way to drive the need to fill would be to push less cars, and then we can focus on public transit. We have public transit, we just need it more often.
Well, and we can talk about bike lanes, and we can talk about alternatives, but we don't have that happening in this city right now. And my
We don't
concern
have any.
is this is, our residential areas are not simply residents that live here full-time, that can take advantage of rapid transit or any other form of transportation. This is a tourist-based town, and we have a lot of tourists, and they come in cars. They don't come in anything else. So when we start reducing the requirement to provide parking for residential developments, we exacerbate the parking problem. And we're exacerbating a parking problem for the people who live here all the time. And I don't want to see that happen.
And we don't have a road system here that can handle it, and that's a problem, and that's got to be resolved eventually, so that people can get around, and those roads should have bicycle lanes.
Yeah.
But to think of taking up a turning lane or anything on 101 for bicycle lanes is frightening, in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with you, Sean, that that's the direction we should be going, but the reality in this town isn't there.
Sure. It could force it that way.
I think it's a time to move in that direction, and I think this would be a good start. And as somebody who's never lived in a big city, never owned a car, and lives now in Lincoln City and owns one car, I would be somebody who would be happy in getting one of these units with reduced parking space.
Yeah.
And Mr. Chair, if I could just add, again, this is not a maximum. If somebody wants to build a house and provide 2 parking spaces or 3 parking spaces, they can do it. And the VRDs, which is where the large number of visitors come, they're not going to have a reduced parking requirement.
Right, but the people who, in my experience, in my neighborhood, when the people come for the VRDs, they're not only parking in the parking allowed for the VRD, they're parking all over the streets as well. So I understand the required parking for the VRD is great, but when someone rents the VRD across the street from us and 18 people show up for the party that goes on for 2 days, they're not parking in the driveway of that VRD.
And to add to what Patty just said, we have a situation with ours with the VRDs bringing 2 and 3 boats along with the cars that they're parking, and RVs, and trailers. So that's all coming in along with this parking, too.
But reducing the requirements for a apartment or something like that isn't going to affect the parking spots available for these people who are offending the law already. It's not changing that condition at all.
It's not, but the others, there's still others that are impeding on that parking, that are coming here and doing things like this.
Sounds like another enforcement issue.
Exactly, it is.
I mean,
Huge one.
yeah, I mean, for example, the mobile home park, it's one space per dwelling, you know, I think this has potential to make some of our housing more affordable, so I support it.
What I'm hearing is you want me to break this ordinance into
Into
two
two.
and bring them both back,
Bring them both back, yeah.
with at least the tree one having some changes to it.
Yes, yeah.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Richard. Whoa. All right. Any old business? None. No new business? No planning commission training? Any reports and comments
Let's see,
from staff?
you want to talk about the Beat the Wave?
I do, but I can't find the sheet of paper that
Okay.
that
I
Kate
can, I
gave
can
me.
take it if you want.
There you go.
Sure.
You got it? Okay.
Yes, so we will be having a series of meetings in our various neighborhoods about the Beat the Wave tsunami maps, and Beat the Wave is how much time you will have to get from your residence that may be in a tsunami zone to a safe area, and what ideas you may have for the people who are working on this project. And one meeting, the first will be Tuesday, November 27th at the Pacific Baptist Church in Cutler City. You can attend any of them, but these are for particular neighborhoods. And then Thursday, November 29th at the City Council Chambers. And this will focus on the maps for the Lake and Ocean Lake neighborhoods. And then Monday, December 17th at the Community Center. And this will focus on the Wacoma and Rhodes End neighborhoods. And Thursday, December 20th, at the Oregon Coast Community College. And this is for the Taft and Nelscott neighborhoods, and all the meetings are at 6 p.m. and will run for about 2 hours. So we hope to see you there. Anything else, Richard?
Yes, two things. We have two commissioners whose terms are expiring at the end of the year, and that's Miles and Doug. And so those are technically open, and obviously both of them can reapply for that, but the applications are now open for planning commissioner.
And has the city posted notice of that, for example, in the News Guard?
I believe so. I'm not sure, but I believe so.
Good.
Another announcement is on Wednesday, November 28th at 6 p.m. right here, there will be a meet and greet for the candidates that are being interviewed for the planning director position.
All right, encourage you to
Wednesday,
attend that.
6 p.m. right here.
6 p.m.?
6 p.m. on the 28th,
Like 1 week from now?
1 week from tomorrow.
And any other staff comments?
I would just really encourage you all to come. You'll be obviously working with it, whoever's selected, so it'd be good to see how you interact with them. Other thing, well, we can do the future agenda.
Any comments from commissioners? I just wanted to say, since this is Thanksgiving week, thanks to city staff and the planning department in particular, and to all of you, and all the people who showed up tonight, and especially you, our last remaining. Thank you for participating in our process here. We appreciate that. Okay, and then Richard, future agenda item?
Just what we didn't do tonight, what we asked to bring back. So what I would recommend is that we meet December 4th, and I'll bring that back. And because the idea is that it would go to the city council on the 10th. The 19th, we have nothing on the agenda. We only have to meet once a month. You can, well, actually, I think we want to have that meeting anyway, so, yeah, we do want to have that meeting, so. The January 1st meeting,
We want to have that meeting, for sure.
I'm assuming you would like to cancel that meeting?
You got it. It's canceled.
So the December 4th meeting will probably go a lot quicker because I won't be here.
It's also my birthday, so I'm going to hustle you through. So.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, well, thank you, everybody. The meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.